Hey everybody, Freddy here with another video. This is the third video in the series of Azure Monitor or Azure Observability. If you haven't watched the other videos, I would recommend that you go back and you watch those videos. That way you understand where we are. We're talking about observability. We're talking about different ways to obtain or acquire observability in Azure. So we're gonna start looking at the data cycle. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start looking at the whole data cycle. We're going to go through every single circle in this diagram here. The first thing, this video is going to concentrate on the generate portion of the whole process. When we talk about generate, we're talking about this section here on the left hand side where we say data sources. Data sources could be anything, could be IoT devices, could be an application that is running, web application that is running, it could be a microservice, could be an AKS cluster that has many components. That would be part of the infrastructure. As part of the infrastructure is VMs as well. We're looking at different VMs, we're looking at VPN connections, we're looking at express routes. We're looking at different areas, application gateways. Azure platform could be Entra ID, where you're generating a lot of different logs and who logs in, when they log in, you know, that kind of information that could be very beneficial to understand. Custom sources could be devices that are running FluentD, for example. FluentD is part of the Apache family where data sources generate traffic, but again, could be anything that generates data, and that data that we're looking at is metrics, could be logs, could be traces, could be pretty much any of that. And remember, in the other video, again, if you haven't watched the other video, please do so, where we explain what metrics are, what logs are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this different ways that this data is being generated. Now again, this data is generated, which is either metrics. Metrics is something like the CPU utilization of a VM, the amount of memory that is being used, how much data is being written to the disk, if there is anything in the queue, anything that is not ready to be written to the disk. Those types of things are the things that you want to understand, because if you understand that there's data in the queue from the disk queue length, you understand that maybe the disk is too slow. If you should be using a solid state drive, but you're using a standard hard disk, you should be changing that, you know. So these are the types of things that you have to understand. And a lot of times in databases, a lot of times you're using the hard drive that is not fast enough. If you remember, in Azure, you have the ability to select the drive. And as you increase the drive, you also increase the IOPS, the amount of data that you can write to that disk. So those are the types of things that we have to look at when we look at the at this type of data that is coming in, the metrics, the logs, the traces. And again, where that data is going to go, it's going to go into the log analytics workspace. Remember, in the first video I mentioned that whatever data is collected, that data needs to go somewhere. It needs to go into something that is like a database. In this case, it's going to go to the log analytics workspace. That's where all the data is going to be collected. I'm going to show you in a minute how that looks like and how the data is going to get into the log analytics workspace, and how the log analytics workspace is able to get the schema is able to be extended depending on the data that you're being ingested. So the log analytics workspace is going to have tables on where the data is going to be stored. So again, this is pretty much the way that this data is created. The data is created either by an application, either by an infrastructure device like a VM or an AKS cluster, or an Azure platform like an Entra ID, formerly known as the Azure AD. Somebody that logs in, who logged in, when. If you're looking for information, for example, when the global administrator logs in, you can set that up. You can tell the platform to send that type of data, which is a log, to the log analytics workspace, which is the database. And then from there, you can pretty much do anything. At that point, you can alert if there is something that you're looking for, or you can, you know, if this data like metrics, you can put it into a dashboard. And again, we're going to look at all this in detail. However, right now in this video we're looking at data sources. Okay, so when we get into the Azure Monitor and we focus on the generate portion of the Azure Monitor. Okay, when we look at a VM, so let's just look at this VM. We have a Linux VM and a Windows VM. Let's just look at the Linux VM for a second. This is called Ukraine that I was using for another test. Let's go ahead and use that. When we look at the information about this VM, one of the things that we can look at is settings. And here you have the disk, you have the operating system, you have the configuration. All of this information is here. And this is where you have the information about the disk, what kind of disk you're using. In this case, I'm using an SSD LRS, as you can see here. Again, this information is important because depending on what application you're running, this disk may not be fast enough, because again, this is a 30 gigabyte size drive, which gives me 120 IOPS. If I was running a database on this may be a choke point right here. 120 gig IOPS it may not be big enough for a database. However, I don't know this right at this point. So what I need to do is I need to gather some data. So I go to the monitoring section, and the monitoring section, this is what confuses a lot of people. There's a lot of different options like insights. We haven't started talking about insights yet. But in this case, what we have is we have alerts, we have metrics, we have logs. So let's just talk about metrics for a second. Again, metrics are typically things like CPU utilization. So again, the scope, you always have a scope. A scope is what are you looking at? The namespace, which is virtual machine, and in what metric you're looking at. So in the case of a CPU, for example, you can look at processor, percentage CPU, and then you have the option of either aggregate or max, min. So for example, if you do max, this data here is information that is given to you, however is not being logged anywhere. So this information is just here. One of the things that you can do is, for example, you can say in the diagnostic settings information. Again, if you look here, it says Azure Monitoring collects host level metrics like CPU utilization, disk, and network usage for all virtual machines without any additional software. So again, this information, because you're running on a VM, this is what you can do. One of the things that it gives you the option is to send this data to a storage account. So again, this one is one of the things that you can do, but the other one is logs. In this case, with an Azure virtual machine, you get CPU, disk up and down, and things like that. So here you can enable logs. When you enable the logs, it tells you that it's going to use a collection rule. So again, it tells you the subscription, and it tells you the collection rule. The collection rule by default, it creates one. But I don't want to use that one because I want to create my own. I want to be able to tell it where to send this data. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it FMD collection, no space. So I give it a name. Then in this case, I set up the subscription, and then I have to specify the log analytics workspace. And this is what I want you to understand. The log analytics workspace is always necessary because this is the database where all the data is going to be stored. If you don't have one, it'll create a new one, and it'll give it a name, whatever name you want. Whatever name it wants. If you don't want to do that, then the first thing you should do is you should go to the log analytics workspace, log analytics workspaces, and you create a log analytics workspace. When you create a log analytics workspace, one of the best practices is that you create one for every region. So for example, if you have devices in US West and US East, you should create 2 log analytics workspaces, one for the East and one for the West, because you don't want to be sending data across regions, again, because you're going to be charged for that data. I mean, if it's not a big deal to be charged, then no problem. You can, typically though, you want to set one up in each region. So in this case, I'm going to select the resource group. I'm going to give it a name. And it's going to be in West US 3. So let's go ahead and create one. Again, the reason I'm creating one is because I don't want to allow the system to create one with whatever name it wants. I want to use my own naming convention, and that's what I'm doing. So once this is done, my log analytics workspace is done. I can go to my VM itself. So this work VM is in West US 3, so I'm going to use that instead, because I created the log analytics workspace in the West US. So here I can say, so it wants to use this data collection rule. So I'm going to create a new data collection rule. I'm going to call it FMD collection rule, and we'll come back to this data collection rule because this is a very important section here. So in here, I want to use this FMD test workspace that I created. This is the key right here because I want to use my own. And here, enable process and dependency map. I'm not going to do that at the moment, so I'm just going to say create. So this collection rule, again, subscription and then the collection rule, it doesn't give you a lot of information, a lot of detail. We'll come back to this, so we can say configure, and this is creating the collection rule. Again, if you notice, it didn't give you a lot of details. It didn't give you a lot of information, or a lot of choices. It didn't give you the ability to say how often you want to collect the data. It didn't give you the option to say pretty much anything. So let's look at that. Okay, deployment succeeded. So we're going to go to monitor and we're going to go to settings, and under settings there is something here that says data collection rules. We're going to the data collection rule, and here is where the data collection rule is. If you notice, it says FMD collection rule. This is the one that I created. When I click here, what I'm able to do is I'm able to look at the settings, look at the configuration, data sources, resources. So there's a lot of information. Data sources. Here I say performance counters, Azure Monitor logs. I can click on this, and now I'm able to see the data source, the performance counters. Now I'm able to see the CPU, the different option, the different things that I am capturing with this data collection rule. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at CPU, and the sample rate is 60 seconds. Memory is 60 seconds. Everything is 60 seconds that I'm monitoring. Again, this is a Windows machine that I enabled. So this collection rule automatically is being set to 60 seconds sampling rate. Now this may be okay for you, or this may be too much, or this may not be enough. Maybe you want to set it up as 30 seconds. So you want to be able to collect data every 30 seconds for this specific data collection rule. What does this mean? So if your data collection rule says 30 seconds, then if you need one system to be 30 seconds, another system to be 60 seconds, you're going to need two data collection rules, two different data collection rules. So this is the performance counters. There is other options that are all grayed out at the moment. Destination, if you notice here, Azure Monitor logs, and it's saying the destination is my FMD test workspace, log analytics workspace. So again, this is what the data collection rule is. The data collection rule is the one that is collecting the data from, in this case, the VM, and is sending it to the Azure Azure log analytics workspace. Now, if you can collect other type of data. So for example, you go back to the VM and you go back to insights, for example. We haven't talked about insights, but you can enable insights. Let me see, monitor health. I think it's already enabled on this one. It's already enabled on this one. Let me look at this other one. This one is not enabled yet. You have the ability to enable insights. Insights gives you the ability to be able to use predefined settings that Microsoft creates for you once you enable insights. When you enable insights, it uses, guess what? A data collection rule. Again, the data collection rule is the one that creates the sampling. So in this case, I have my FMD collection rule, and this one is the one that defines where the data is going to be stored in the Azure Log Analytics workspace. When I say configure, then it automatically uses that collection rule to be able to define the thresholds on how often the data is going to be collected. Again, all of it is based on data coming in to the Log Analytics workspace, and then we're going to be able to see that Log Analytics workspace information, and we're going to be able to see what we can do with that. So for now, we're going to leave it at this. All right, so that's the end of this video. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the section down below. And please, let's jump to the next video. And again, thank you so much for watching.